Good evening, all, and thank you for tuning in to tonight's story. If you enjoy it, please remember to subscribe and like the video so we can continue bringing you more horror stories. Now, without further ado, take a deep breath and relax as we take a journey through the night. It started as a dull pressure between my eyes, like the first hints of a sinus headache. I chalked it up to stress or allergies. Something manageable, something normal. Then came the swelling. Slow at first, but steady, like my skin was stretching over something solid, something pushing outward from beneath. The doctor frowned when he saw it, ran tests, scanned my skull. "Tumor," he finally said, his tone edged with sympathy. "We need to act fast." Fast meant surgery. Slicing, digging into my face, but I hesitated. I don't know why. Maybe it was the way the lump throbbed late at night, a rhythmic pulse that didn't feel like my own heartbeat. Maybe it was the way my skin prickled around it, tiny nerve endings alight with sensation, like something was moving. By the time I agreed to the procedure, the lump had grown. The morning of the surgery, I woke up gasping. My hands clawed at my forehead, at the unbearable itch under the surface. I ran to the mirror, expecting to see the same swollen mass. But no, it had split. A jagged crack ran through the center, raw and glistening, as if something inside had pushed too hard. A wet line of fluid trickled down my nose, clear but thick. I touched it, and it moved. Something inside twitched. A scrape, faint but unmistakable, from within my skull. My stomach turned. I pressed against the lump, fighting a rising wave of panic. But the second I did, a pain shot through my head so violently I nearly blacked out. I barely had time to process it before the skin above my brow split open further. A thin black leg pushed out. I screamed. I don't remember collapsing, but I must have. When I came to, I was on the floor, panting, hands shaking as I reached up. The leg was gone. Only the jagged crack remained, glistening, pulsing. The hospital. I needed to get to the hospital. I stumbled to my phone, barely able to see straight, and punched in the number. My breath tensed as something shifted beneath my skin again. Slower this time. Deliberate. "Please," I gasped into the phone. "I need help." The nurse at the other end started to respond, but then the line filled with a sound, a skittering. The sensation exploded across my forehead. Legs shifting, scraping, testing the edges of their cage. I pressed my palm against it, a feeble attempt to hold it all in. But something new came next, biting. Not one, not two, hundreds. It felt like needles piercing from the inside, tiny fangs testing the limits of my flesh. The world spun. I barely registered the nurse's frantic voice before I dropped the phone, my pulse roaring in my ears. I couldn't go to the hospital like this. Not now. Not when I felt the legs flexing, the wet shifting of bodies just beneath the surface. The pressure built, unbearable, making my eyes water, my skull ache. The crack in my forehead widened, skin peeling back in strips. Then the first one came out. It was small, no larger than a dime, but its 8 legs were long and spindly, slick with something that smelled of rot. It scrambled out, clinging to my forehead with hooked feet, and then another followed. And another. I screamed, but the sound barely registered over the rustling, the crawling, the wet pop of spiders spilling from my skull like a broken nest. They poured out in waves, skittering down my face. their legs tangling in my eyelashes, my hair, my open mouth. I choked, gagged, clawed at them, but they kept coming. Inside, something still moved, bigger, something that had been waiting for them to clear the way. My body convulsed as the pressure reached its peak. The skin at my forehead stretched tight, bulging outward, and then, with a sickening tear, something massive pushed free. I didn't get to see it. I was already drowning in the swarm. Lena never believed in ghosts, not in the way some people did anyway. No Ouija boards, no seances, no superstition creeping into her thoughts late at night. If something moved in the house, it had an explanation. A draft, bad wiring, the old bones of the place settling into themselves. But when her little brother started talking about the whispering man, she felt something she couldn't quite explain. Not fear, not at first, just unease. It started 3 weeks after they moved into the house on Holloway Lane, a creaky two-story with peeling blue paint, a yard wild with weeds, and a history the realtor had skimmed over. James was 5, a quiet kid, a little shy, the kind who clung to her leg in new places but laughed too loud at cartoons. He didn't have imaginary friends, didn't make up stories. That's why when he tugged on Lena's sleeve at breakfast and said, "He talks to me at night," she set her spoon down. "Who does?" James hesitated, pushing eggs around his plate. The whispering man. A chill traced down Lena's spine. She glanced at their mother, but she was too busy scrolling on her phone to notice. "What whispering man?" Lena asked carefully. James shrugged. "I don't know. He stays in the corner." That night she checked his room. The corner was empty. James didn't talk about him again for a while. Lena thought maybe it was a passing thing, a dream, a trick of the dark. Kids saw things adults didn't, shapes in the shadows, faces in the folds of blankets. Then one night, Lena woke to the sound of whispers, soft, slithering words drifting through the walls. Her heart jumped into her throat. She sat up, pulse hammering, ears straining. James. The sound came from his room. She slipped out of bed, bare feet silent against the floor. The hallway stretched dark before her, lit only by the faint blue glow of James's nightlight. His door was open a crack. She pushed it wider. James sat on the edge of his bed, back facing her, shoulders stiff. His little hands clutched the blanket in his lap. And in the farthest corner of the room, a shadow shifted. Lena's breath caught. For a second, just a second, she swore she saw a figure folded deep into the corner, limbs stretched long, body pressed into the darkness like it belonged there. Then it was gone. James turned. His face was pale, eyes too wide. "James," Lena whispered, stepping inside. "Who were you talking to?" His lip trembled. "We were playing a game." Lena didn't want to know. Every cell in her body screamed at her to take James, to run, to never set foot in this house again. But she asked anyway. "What game?" James swallowed hard. His little fingers twisted in the blanket. "He whispers first," he murmured. "Then I have to whisper back. If I stop, he gets closer." Lena's stomach turned. She knelt beside him, brushing his hair from his forehead. "You don't have to play," she said, voice tight. James's head shook, frantic. "I do." "Why?" His gaze flicked to the corner. He doesn't like when people break the rules. Lena started sleeping in James's room. She told herself it was to make him feel better, but the truth settled deep in her gut like sickness. Something was in the house with them. She felt it every night, The air pressed thick against her chest like the weight of unseen eyes. The whispers came back just out of reach, a hush of words she couldn't understand. James never answered when she was awake, but the moment sleep dragged her under, she would wake to the sound of his voice, whispering back. She stopped asking what it said. She didn't want to know. One night, James fell asleep early. Lena lay awake beside him, staring at the ceiling. The house creaked. The wind howled through the trees outside. Then, a breath, not James's, not hers, something else. Lena's skin prickled. The whisper curled through the dark. Software, low, right against her ear. Your turn. Ice stabbed into her veins. The rules. The game. She had heard it. She had to answer. Her lips trembled. No. The whisper came again. Your turn. A weight pressed onto the bed, like something was crawling up from the foot of it. The blanket tightened around her legs. James stirred beside her, but he didn't wake. Lena squeezed her eyes shut. She could feel it now, right beside her. Cold breath against her cheek, a voice sliding through her skull. You have to play. Lena ran. She grabbed James, tore from the bed, sprinted for the door. The whispers exploded. Louder now, furious. The air shook. The walls groaned. James screamed. The door slammed shut. Lena clawed at the knob. It wouldn't turn. A shadow stretched across the ceiling, limbs pulling long, face warping into a gaping hole of a mouth, whispering faster, faster, faster. James sobbed into her shoulder. Then, silence. Lena barely breathed. The air settled. The whispers stopped, and the door creaked open on its own. They left that night, packed bags, ran barefoot into the car, never looked back. Their mother didn't ask questions. Maybe she had heard it too. Maybe she didn't need to. Lena made James sleep in her room at the new house. She locked the closet, kept a light on. The whisper never came again. James stopped talking about the game. Years passed. They grew up. The house on Holloway Lane stood empty. And then, one night, years later, Lena woke to the sound of a whisper in the dark. Software. Low. Right against her ear. Your turn. At first, I thought I had forgotten. A long day at work, the stress of deadlines. I convinced myself I must have prepared the meal absent-mindedly that morning, left the flowers as a treat for myself, and somehow set the music on a timer. But I knew better. The scent of the food was fresh, steam still rising from the plate. The flowers, lilies my favorite, stood in a crystal vase I didn't own. And the music? A song from my childhood, one my mother used to hum when I couldn't sleep. The notes drifted through my apartment, soft and deliberate, as if someone had chosen it for me. My pulse quickened. I stood frozen in the entryway, scanning the space for any sign of movement. Nothing was out of place, aside from the impossibility of the setup itself. The front door had been locked when I arrived, no sign of forced entry. The windows were latched, but someone had been here. My stomach churned. I reached for my phone, fingers shaking as I dialed. The call rang once, twice, then stopped. A click, but no voice. I swallowed hard. Hello? Silence. Not empty silence, but something waited, like someone was there, listening, breathing, just out of reach. I gripped the phone tighter. Who is this? Nothing. Then the line went dead. I lowered the phone, my heart hammering against my ribs. I could leave, walk out the door, get in my car, and go anywhere but here. But dread curled around me, thick and cloying. Whoever had done this, whoever had been in my home, they knew me. My favorite meal, my favorite flowers, a song buried in the depths of my childhood memories. I took a slow step forward, forcing myself into motion. The air felt different, charged like the walls themselves were holding a secret. I reached the dining table, the silverware neatly placed, a single candle flickering. A note sat beside the plate. My breath hitched as I picked it up, my own name written in looping cursive across the top. The paper felt expensive, smooth beneath my fingertips. I unfolded it, scanning the words. "You looked beautiful today." A chill crawled up my spine. My gaze flickered to the window, out into the darkened street. How long had someone been watching me? I pressed a hand to my mouth, nausea rising. I should call the police. Before I could move, a creak echoed from the bedroom. The music, it was still playing. My stomach clenched as I realized the sound system had no timer, no automation. Someone had turned it on, and they might still be here. I grabbed the nearest object, a heavy book from the counter, and edged toward the hallway. Each step felt unbearable, the air growing heavier with every movement. My own breath sounded foreign, too loud, shaky. The bedroom door was slightly ajar. I pressed my palm against it, pushing it open with agonizing slowness. The room looked untouched, except for the music playing softly from my speaker. I reached for it with my free hand, shutting it off with a trembling finger. The sudden silence rang in my ears. A reflection in the mirror caught my eye. Something was tucked beneath my pillow. I turned, hesitating. Then, inch by inch, I lifted the pillow away. Another note lay on the sheets, this one shorter, scrawled hurriedly. "I like watching you sleep." My vision blurred with panic. The walls seemed to close in, the weight of unseen eyes pressing against me. I staggered backward, my body screaming at me to run, to flee. And then I heard it. A breath, not mine, slow, measured, right behind me. I spun, swinging the book wildly, but I hit nothing. The door to the closet stood slightly open now, though I knew it had been shut before. My body refused to move, every muscle locked in terror. I wanted to believe I was imagining things. That stress had warped reality into something unrecognizable. But I knew better. I forced myself to step forward, hand trembling as I reached for the closet door. My fingers barely brushed the handle when it swung open. Darkness, a void of shadow, then movement. I didn't see details, only the impression of a shape, something shifting in the blackness. A hand darted out, fingers grazing my wrist. I screamed, stumbling backward, crashing into the nightstand. A sharp pain flared through my leg, but I didn't stop. I ran, out of the bedroom, through the hallway, past the untouched dinner and flowers, straight to the door. My fingers fumbled with the lock, my vision blurring. A presence loomed behind me, a weight in the air that threatened to swallow me whole. The lock clicked. I wrenched the door open and stumbled onto the porch, gasping in the night air. I ran for my car, my hands shaking so violently I barely managed to get the keys in the ignition. The engine roared to life, headlights cutting through the darkness. Something moved in the window, a shadow, standing there, watching. I didn't stay to see who or what it was. I drove, fast, reckless. My heart hammering so hard I thought it might give out. I didn't stop until I reached a crowded gas station miles away, parking beneath the harsh fluorescent lights. I called the police. They searched my home, Found the dinner, the flowers, the notes. But the closet, empty. No forced entry. No signs of a break-in. No proof of anyone at all. They told me it was a prank. Maybe I left the door unlocked. Maybe I had a secret admirer. Maybe it was all in my head. But they didn't feel the breath on their neck. Didn't see the shadow in the window. Didn't know that the music was playing again when I finally returned home. And this time a new note waited on my pillow. I'll see you soon. I have always checked under my bed before sleeping. It started when I was a kid, long after my parents stopped tucking me in. They would flip the light off, shut the door, and leave me alone with the darkness. But I never truly felt alone. The space under my bed seemed deep, as if it stretched beyond the floorboards, beyond the walls. Most nights, nothing happened. Most nights I found dust, a lost sock, maybe an old book I had knocked off my nightstand. It was late. I had stayed up reading, my bedside lamp casting soft golden light across the room. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the windows, sending tree branches scraping against the house. When my eyes grew heavy, I set my book down and leaned over the side of my bed. My fingers reached for the comfort of the hardwood floor, a familiar ritual. Only this time, something touched me first, not a bump, not a shift of air, a touch, software dry, a grazing of skin against skin. I jerked my hand back, heart slamming in my chest, my breath caught in my throat. The light. I needed light. Fumbling, I grabbed my phone and switched on the flashlight, angling it at the space below. Nothing. Just dust and a few stray pieces of lint. I held my breath, my pulse thudding in my ears. Had I imagined it? A trick of exhaustion, maybe? Then, a whisper of movement. Not visible, not loud, but there. A shift in the air, like someone exhaling softly in the dark. I didn't sleep that night. Morning came, but the unease didn't leave me. I spent the day convincing myself that nothing had been there. A moment of fatigue, a dream creeping into wakefulness. Still, when night came, I hesitated before getting into bed. I told myself I was being foolish. I reached down again, hand trembling slightly, brushing my fingertips against the floor. Nothing touched me this time. Relief flooded my chest. I let out a slow breath and settled beneath the covers, closing my eyes. Sleep came fast, and so did the dream. I was in my room in bed, staring at the ceiling, but I couldn't move. My limbs felt pinned, heavy, as if something was holding them down. Then from beneath me, a scratching, fingernails dragging across the floorboards, slow, deliberate, circling the bed. I wanted to turn my head to look, but I couldn't. Then the whisper came, software dry, right against my ear. I like when you reach for me. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The room was silent. My breath came in quick, uneven gulps. I didn't check under the bed that night. The next few nights, I kept my hands tucked close to my chest. I didn't reach down, didn't even let my feet dangle over the edge. But it didn't matter. It started moving when I was awake. A creak beneath me, a shift of weight. The feeling of being watched through the thin layer of my mattress. The sound of breathing that wasn't mine. One night I heard it shift closer. The soft press of a palm against the underside of the bed. A gentle, expectant touch. It was waiting. I should have left. Should have packed a bag, slept on the couch, burned the bed frame. But I didn't. Instead, I spoke to it. It happened without thinking. A single, whispered sentence into the dark. "What do you want?" The silence stretched. Then from below, a slow, deliberate tap against the floor, like a finger gently rapping against wood. Once, twice, 3 times. A response. I barely breathed. My skin felt tight, my stomach in knots. I wanted to ask again, but I didn't. I pulled the blanket over my head, curled into myself like a child, and I waited for morning. I should have never acknowledged it. The next night, it touched me again. I woke up to something pressing against my back. Not firm, not a grip, a soft, lingering touch. Fingers resting against my spine. I froze. My mouth went dry. My hands clenched into the sheets. The touch stayed. Then, as if sensing my fear, it moved, slow, exploring, fingertips grazing up my back, trailing across my ribs. I clenched my jaw, forcing myself still. Then it withdrew, a soft drag of skin against skin, a final brush of fingers as it slipped away beneath the bed. I didn't move again until sunlight touched my window. By the time the next night came, I knew what was happening. It wasn't just watching, it was learning. It had been waiting, patient in the dark, waiting for me to notice it, and now it wanted more. I stayed awake as long as I could. Hours passed. The room grew colder, the silence stretching. Then near dawn, I felt it again. A shift, a presence, the whisper of movement. But this time, it didn't touch me, not at first. This time, it reached for my hand. I was lying on my side, my arm draped over the edge of the mattress. I didn't realize my mistake until it was too late. A dry, thin hand curled around my wrist. A grip stronger than before. Not a caress, not an invitation, a pull. I yanked back with all my strength, heart slamming against my ribs. For a moment it held on. The skin beneath its fingers burned with cold. Then after a breathless second, it let go. I scrambled back, chest heaving, the blankets tangling around me. My wrist throbbed. I grabbed my phone, fumbling to turn on the light. The glow filled the room. Nothing was there. But when I looked at my wrist, the marks were still there. Thin, pale fingerprints pressed deep into my skin. I knew I couldn't stay. I had spent too many nights trapped in the same cycle. Waiting, listening, letting it wait for me. I packed a bag, threw on a jacket, and made for the door. But then, a whisper, not from under the bed, from behind me. "Don't go!" I didn't turn around. I didn't acknowledge it. I stepped outside, slamming the door behind me. The second I was out, the air felt lighter. The tightness in my chest faded. I walked down the street, gripping my keys so hard they cut into my palm. I didn't look back. I didn't need to, because I knew the door was still open, and in the darkness beyond, something was waiting. The first time I hear it, I think it's just my imagination. A long, slow breath somewhere in the dark of my room. Not my own. Not the old pipe shifting in the walls. Something else. I sit up, rubbing the sleep from my eyes. My bedroom is silent now, except for the hum of my fan and the ticking of the clock. The shadows look normal, the furniture sitting where it always has. My dresser by the window, my desk against the far wall, my closet door cracked just an inch. Nothing is out of place. I shake my head, exhale through my nose. Maybe I dreamed it. Maybe I half woke up and brought a sound back with me. I lie back down. The moment I close my eyes, inhale, exhale, I bolt upright, heart slamming against my ribs. It's close. Somewhere in the room, something is breathing. I don't move. I listen. The air feels thicker now, heavier on my skin. I squint into the dark, willing my eyes to adjust faster. My phone is right there, just inches away on my nightstand. If I can grab it, turn on the flashlight. Inhale, exhale. Goosebumps crawl up my arms. It's right next to me. My hand shakes as I reach for my phone. My fingers barely graze the screen before the breath comes again. Closer, warmer, almost on my face. I snatch my phone up, thumb smashing the flashlight icon. The room floods with light. Nothing. The floor is empty. My closet door still sits open an inch, just as I left it. The air is quiet. I sit there, chest heaving, throat dry. I let out a shaky laugh, dragging a hand through my hair. No one is here. The next night, I tell myself I imagined it. I go to bed later, make sure I'm exhausted enough to pass out the second my head hits the pillow. But the moment sleep drags me under, I feel it. The change in the air, the weight of something unseen pressing against my room. The breath comes softer this time, like it's trying not to wake me. Inhale, exhale. A sigh sliding from unseen lips. I go rigid beneath my blankets, forcing myself still. I can't tell where it is. Is it by the window? The closet right beside me? I grip my phone under the covers. I shouldn't move, but I do. Light bursts from my screen, washing over my room. Again, nothing. It happens every night after that. Always the same? The moment I start slipping into sleep, it starts breathing. Deep, slow inhales. Long, drawn-out exhales. I stop turning on the light. It doesn't matter. Nothing is ever there. But the feeling stays. I know it's in the room with me. I feel it watching. It's patient. So patient. It never touches me, never moves, just waits. A week passes. I sleep in the daytime now. Stay up all night, eyes locked on the ceiling, ears straining for that first breath. One night, I feel it before I hear it. A shift in the room, a tightness in the air. Then, inhale, exhale. I stare at the ceiling, refuse to move. I let it breathe. Let it sit there in the dark. I count the seconds between each breath. 6, sometimes 7, never more than 10. Then I see it, the closet door, that inch-wide gap. It's open wider now. I don't look away. I can't. A full minute passes, maybe longer. Then, soft as a whisper, the closet door moves. Not much, just half an inch. I don't breathe. The air is ice against my skin. The next exhale drifts from inside the closet. I don't go near the closet again. I leave it as it is, open just enough that I can see the dark space inside. I stop sleeping entirely. Naps on the couch, yes. Dozing off in the early morning when the sun is out. But never in my room, never in the dark, not with it still watching me. Then one night, exhaustion wins. I don't mean to sleep. I blink, and the next thing I know, I'm sinking, floating on the edge of unconsciousness. And it knows. The breath slides closer. Inhale, exhale, right against my ear. I jolt awake. For the first time, the breathing doesn't stop. I reach for my phone. But the moment I move, the bed shifts. Something presses down beside me. The mattress dips. A weight settles right next to my body. I don't move. I don't scream. I just listen. The breath is so close now, and this time, when I exhale, it exhales with me. I stay awake until sunrise. The moment light spills through my window, the pressure lifts. The closet door sits open wider than before. I get up, hands shaking, and push it shut. I sit back on the bed. Wait. The air doesn't change. The breath doesn't return. Maybe it's gone. Maybe closing the door was enough. I let out a slow, heavy sigh. Then from behind the closet door, it sighs back. I used to pray for sleep. Now I beg to stay awake. The nightmares started small, shadows moving where they shouldn't, whispers just below hearing. Nothing worse than a childhood fear of the dark, the kind of thing I could shake off when I woke up. But they got worse. They became real. Not in the way dreams feel real while you're in them, but in the way they don't fade when you wake. I would feel fingernails drag down my arms hours after I left the dream. I would taste blood in my mouth from biting my tongue in the places I had no mouth to scream. I would wake with my ribs aching, the ghost of hands still wrapped around them. I started avoiding sleep. At first it was just small things. Coffee before bed, keeping the lights on, letting the TV run in the background. But soon it wasn't enough, because something noticed, and it started watching me. I first saw it 3 months ago. I had woken up stiff and frozen, my body locked in place. The familiar paralysis settled over me like a second skin, heavy and unmovable. But this time, I wasn't alone. It crouched in the corner of my bedroom, between the dresser and the door. A shape too large to fit in the space it occupied, its body compressed, folded in ways I didn't understand. Its eyes gleamed, not red, not glowing, just open, watching. It didn't move, didn't breathe. I wanted to scream, to thrash, to pull myself out of the moment, but I couldn't. I just stared, and it stared back. Then it smiled. The paralysis broke. I gasped, jerking upright, shaking so hard my teeth clattered. The room was empty, but I knew. I felt it. It hadn't left. It was waiting. For months, the routine never changed. I would wake up, trapped. It would be there, crouched in the dark, silent, watching, waiting for something I didn't want to know. The nightmares never stopped. If anything, they grew worse. I woke gasping, sobbing, unable to shake the things I had seen. People I loved, twisted apart into shapes they shouldn't be. Mouths stretched too wide, gaping with no sound. Corridors that folded inward as I ran, dragging me into the walls, forcing me through places no body should fit. I was breaking. I knew that. But I also knew one other thing. The thing in my room had never hurt me. It had never moved closer, never reached out, never dragged me back into the dreams. It just watched. That's when I realized it wasn't there to hurt me. It was there to see how much I could take. I sat up in bed, the sheets damp with sweat. I didn't bother turning on the light. I knew it was there. It always was. My breath shook. My hands curled in my lap. I swallowed back the terror, the instinct screaming at me to never speak to it. And then softly I whispered, "Keep me awake." For the first time it moved, not much, not fast, just unfolding. Limbs stretching, filling the space that never should have fit them. It rose to its full height, and then slowly it took a step forward. It was a mistake. I realized that the moment the shadows shifted and the air grew thick, not heavy, not humid, thick, like liquid pressing against my skin. My heart pounded, but I forced myself still. It loomed at the edge of my bed. I had never seen it so close. The details were hazy, blurred, shifting between shapes. Tall, too tall, arms too long, a face that was not a face but the suggestion of one, carved into darkness. It reached for me, not fast, not a lunge, not an attack. A slow, deliberate stretch. Fingertips brushed my forehead, and then I was awake. For the first time in months, I didn't dream. I should have been relieved. Instead, I felt watched. I was never alone anymore. Even during the day, I caught glimpses, reflections that didn't match my movements, shadows stretching in places where no light should cast them. The exhaustion didn't leave. I had thought the dreams were what drained me, but now it was something else. Every night I stayed awake longer. Every night it reached for me again. And every night the room grew darker, not dim, not shadowed, dark. Like the walls were peeling back to reveal something deeper beneath them. Like I was being pulled into something else. I couldn't move anymore. I had gone 6 days without sleep. My hands trembled, my eyes blurred. Every breath felt like pulling air through soaked cotton. I felt stretched thin. The room pulsed, like it was breathing. I sat on the edge of the bed, heart slow, sluggish. The light in the hallway was distant now, like the house had grown longer, like I had slipped farther away from the world I knew. The air rippled. I didn't look at it. Didn't have to. It was closer than ever. The floor shifted under its weight. A hand curled over my shoulder, not a grip, not a restraint, just resting there. Heavy, cold, real. And then, "Come with me," I exhaled. Somewhere deep inside me, I knew I wasn't in my house anymore. Not really. The walls, the bed, the air I breathed, they weren't mine. They had become his, or maybe they always had been. I felt myself lean forward, letting go, letting it take me, because I couldn't keep my eyes open anymore. And for the first time in my life, I didn't know if I would ever wake up. I tried not to show that I knew. I'd heard the other air marshals talk about it, but I didn't believe them. Drunk stories, hushed whispers in back rooms, legends passed between agents working graveyard flights. There's something out there, they'd say, hiding in plain sight. Yet here I was, undercover on a red-eye flight to Reykjavik, and I had an honest-to-God vampire in seat 6A. I had noticed the moment he boarded. A tall man, dressed simply, a navy blue suit, black leather gloves. No luggage, no carry-on. His gait too fluid, too effortless, like his feet never really touched the ground. Then there was his face, pale, polished like stone, with cheekbones that could cut glass. No wrinkles, no pores, no visible sweat. He had eyes the color of old blood, set deep under a perfectly smooth brow. He did not blink, not once. I kept my hands steady on my tray table, my plastic cup half filled with stale airplane coffee. From my seat in 14C, I had a clear view down the aisle. 6A sat perfectly upright, hands folded in his lap. He hadn't moved since takeoff. Didn't read. Didn't eat, didn't check his phone, just watched. Not me, not yet, but someone. And that someone was the girl in 7B. We were somewhere over the Atlantic, and the plane had gone silent. A full flight, yet barely anyone stirred. Heads slumped forward, eyes shut, breathing deep. The flight attendants whispered near the galley, voices low and drowsy. The cabin lights dimmed. Outside the window, the sky stretched black as an open mouth. I checked my watch and glanced at 7B. She was asleep, or at least I thought she was. Her head rested against the window, blonde hair tangled around her headphones. 6A had not stopped looking at her. I adjusted my belt, shifting my weight. It was against protocol to interfere unless a direct threat presented itself. But my gut twisted. He was waiting for something. The seatbelt sign flickered on. A ripple of turbulence shook the plane. I felt it deeper than I should have, like the air had thickened, pressing itself into my ribs. Then, 6A turned his head. Slow, deliberate, and his gaze landed on me. My throat locked. He knew. I held steady, keeping my face neutral, my hands relaxed. I'd been trained for this. Long stakeouts, undercover work, blending in, but there was nothing normal about this. His lips parted. A smile, but not a real one. His teeth, God. They weren't fangs, that would have been easier. Expected. Instead, his teeth were small, thin, too many, like a shark's mouth, layered back and back and back. I gripped the armrest. His gaze flicked toward my hand. I let go. His smile widened. And then slowly he turned back to 7B. The temperature dropped. I could see my breath. The plane rattled again. Not turbulence. Something beneath us. The flight attendant up front shifted, rubbing her arms. "Is it cold in here?" she murmured to her coworker. They fiddled with the thermostat. Nothing changed. I checked the window. Something moved outside. A shape in the dark clouds. Not lightning, not the wing. Something with form. Then 7B exhaled sharply. I turned. She was shivering now, teeth chattering. A soft whimper escaped her lips. Her skin looked pale. I watched, unmoving. 6A leaned forward, just slightly. His lips parted again, and he inhaled. A thin wisp, colorless, weightless, rose from her mouth. I blinked. My body refused to move, as if every muscle had been locked in place. I was watching him steal the breath from her lungs. No bite, no blood, no need for a wound, just a slow siphoning. Her skin grew paler, her fingers twitched. 6A sighed, satisfied. The air grew thinner. He sat back, adjusting his gloves. A few rows up, a passenger stirred, then went still. 7B exhaled again, fainter. Her breathing was fading. My training kicked in. My fingers closed around my holster. Protocol be damned. This was a direct threat. I unclipped the strap, heart hammering, fingers going numb from the cold. 6A turned his head again. No expression now. No smile, just waiting. A challenge. I stood, a shadow passed over the plane. Something outside. The oxygen mask dropped from above, swaying gently. Passengers twitched in their seats. Not waking, not aware. Trapped in a twilight sleep. A whisper slid through the cabin, not from the intercom. "Sit down, agent." His voice was inside my skull, not spoken, placed. I froze, a choice, a final one. The plane lurched downward. The pilot's voice crackled over the speakers, garbled, confused. "We, adjusting course, air pressure," but the descent wasn't natural. The shadows outside thickened. Clouds swallowed the plane. I could see it now. A shape outside, flying parallel to us. Not a plane, not an animal. Something with wings spread wide, long as the cabin itself. Its form shifting, its body flickering between smoke and something solid. Waiting, watching. 6A sighed, stretching his fingers. "You should never have looked at me, Paul." My blood froze. I had never given him my name. The plane tilted. Rows of seats groaned under the pressure. The cabin shook. 7B's breath hitched. Not much left. Barely clinging. I had 1 second. 1 moment to decide. I reached into my jacket. 6A didn't stop me. Didn't move. Just waited. I pulled my sidearm, aimed for his head, and fired. A gunshot at close range should have been deafening, should have left ears ringing, screams rising, chaos erupting. Instead, the sound was swallowed. The moment the bullet hit him, he shattered. Not blood, not bone. His body collapsed into mist, spiraling into the cabin air, filling it. The lights flickered. The plane shuddered. Passengers stirred. I turned to 7B. Her breath returned. She inhaled deep, fingers clenching the armrest. Color crawled back into her skin. The darkness outside thinned. The clouds parted. And for a split second, I saw the thing in the sky. Its wings beat once, then it vanished. The flight leveled. I collapsed into my seat, chest heaving, fingers still locked around my gun. The intercom crackled. Ladies and gentlemen, we apologize for the unexpected turbulence. We are now back on course to Reykjavik. Please remain seated. I turned toward 6A. The seat was empty. Only his gloves remained, folded neatly on the tray table, waiting. The passengers woke slowly, stretching, yawning, shaking off sleep like nothing had happened. I watched them, heart still hammering. No one seemed to notice. No one except 7B. She rubbed her temples, eyes fluttering open. A look of confusion passed over her face. She turned to me. For a second, I expected her to say it, to ask, to know. Instead, she frowned. Why is it so cold in here? I exhaled. The engines roared, and the plane descended into the dawn. His eyes were twisted and his teeth jagged. But those lips, those weren't his lips. I knew my brother's face. I had known it since childhood. Every freckle, every scar, every shift in his expression, the way he'd grin, lopsided and teasing, whenever he told a joke, the way his lip curled when he was about to lie. But the thing sitting across from me at the dinner table, hands neatly folded, posture stiff as a corpse, that wasn't him. The lips were pale, too smooth, like they had never been touched by sunlight, never cracked with a dry cough, never bled from a careless bite. They moved with a sick precision, curling at the corners. He was smiling. Something on your mind, Jack? His voice sounded right, but voices could be mimicked. I gripped my fork harder. The candle between us flickered, sending shadows dancing across the worn kitchen walls. He was still staring. I forced a laugh. Yeah, you look like hell. His smile widened. A sliver of pink parted his borrowed lips. I saw his teeth again. They weren't human, not really. Teeth had depth. They sat in gums anchored in bone, part of the flesh that held them in place. But these looked placed, like they had been set into the mouth one by one, lined up in jagged precision. I swallowed hard. Long night? He tilted his head. The candlelight caught his eyes, and for the first time, I saw them move. Not like eyes adjusting to light, not like a casual glance. They shifted inside his skull, as if whatever sat behind them was trying to adjust to wearing them. I forced myself to eat. I had to act normal, had to pretend that whatever sat across from me was still my brother. Because if I didn't, it would know. And if it knew, I wouldn't be leaving this table alive. He had come home the night before. That was what I had told myself anyway. I heard the key in the door, heard the shuffle of boots against the hardwood. I had been sitting in the living room, whiskey in hand, replaying every conversation we ever had. My brother had been missing for 3 weeks, and then, just like that, he walked through the door. "I'm home." 2 words, simple, but the moment he said them, my stomach curdled. The house felt different. The walls seemed farther apart. The air carried a faint dampness, like the scent of rotting leaves after a storm. I stood slowly. "Where the hell have you been?" His eyes flickered. For a moment, just a second, he looked confused, like he wasn't sure what to say. Then a smile, those lips. "I got lost." A lie. I knew it. He knew it. But I didn't push. Not yet. Now, sitting at the table, I felt the sweat at the base of my neck. He was still watching, still smiling. I focused on my plate. One bite, another. Chew, swallow, act normal. His hand twitched. I nearly dropped my fork. It wasn't a natural twitch, not a muscle spasm. It was a delayed reaction, like his fingers had forgotten how to move. "Jack," he said, "why do you look so nervous?" My heartbeat hammered. I forced a grin. "You disappear for 3 weeks and come back looking like that? I'd have to be an idiot not to be concerned." His lips twitched, a flicker of something beneath them. Not teeth, not flesh. Something else. I set my fork down carefully. "Tell me where you've been." His fingers curled against the table. His nails dug too deep into the wood. A slow breath left his lips. "Do you really want to know?" The room felt smaller. I couldn't swallow, couldn't move, but I had to. I had to keep pushing, had to keep pretending I didn't see what I was really looking at. I leaned back, forced a laugh. "Come on, humor me." The lights buzzed. The candle between us shuddered. He moved, not much, not fast, but his skin shifted, like it wasn't his to wear. I gripped the edge of my chair. He saw, and he grinned wider. "All right, Jack," he murmured, voice lower now. "I'll tell you." The candle went out, and in the darkness, I heard him rise from his seat. My chair scraped against the floor as I shoved myself back. A whisper of movement in the pitch black. Then, breath. Warm. Close. Right against my cheek. I lurched sideways, hands fumbling for anything. The candle. A knife. Something to put between me and whatever stood in that darkened space. Then, the match. I struck it. Light flared to life, and I saw it. Not my brother, not anymore. It was wearing him. The skin was just a husk, a thing peeled from its original owner and stretched across a shape that didn't quite fit. His lips had peeled apart at the seams. Something else moved beneath them. Not a tongue, not a jaw. A mass of tendrils pulsing wetly, shifting, curling like fingers longing to touch. I screamed. The match dropped. Darkness swallowed me again. I ran. The house stretched long. The hallways weren't right anymore. Rooms where they didn't belong, doors leading nowhere. The air smelled of damp wood and old breath. A cry from behind. My hands slammed into the back door. Locked. My skin went cold. A sound, wet and eager. I turned. He stood in the hallway. His jaw hung loose now. More tendrils had pushed free. They swayed, sensing, sniffing. But the worst part, his eyes were crying. Not him, not it. The real ones. The ones buried somewhere deep inside. a final whisper. "Help me!" Then the tendril shot forward. I ducked. My shoulder slammed through the door, splinters cutting into my skin. Then I was outside. Cold air, wet grass. I ran until my lungs burned, until the trees blurred. But I didn't get far. A sound reached me, low, shuddering, breaking apart at the edges. Not the tendrils, not the thing that wore my brother. A voice, his voice. "Jack, please, don't leave me." I stopped. My chest heaved. My limbs screamed for me to keep moving. My instincts clawed at me to go. But I turned. The house stood like a broken ribcage against the dark sky. Splintered beams exposed where I had forced my way out. The door hung open. A shadow leaned in the doorway. He wasn't moving anymore. The tendrils had retreated, curling inward, twitching like they had been wounded. And behind them, his eyes not shifting, not moving inside his skull like something else was wearing them. Just his. I took a step forward, then another. His breath hitched. He shook. "Help me, Jack. I don't want to be this." Tears stung my eyes. I had lost him once already, when he disappeared, when I had given up on ever finding him again. I wouldn't lose him twice. I swallowed back the fear that clawed inside my throat. I walked back inside, and I closed the door behind me. I told him not to try, damn it. He just didn't listen. I told him it was too steep. I told him what the risks were. I reminded him he was still on the tail end of a bad flu, that he might get dizzy, that it wasn't the time to go climbing, but he didn't care. He never had. His safety was always his last priority. His own physical body was the least of his concerns. My long-haired hippie of a husband was too obsessed with finding enlightenment, with pushing beyond the limits of human experience, to remember that he was just that, human and sick. And now look at him, wedged between two jagged rocks at the bottom of Dan's ravine, his body bent the wrong way, his arms too long, his head twisted too far to the side. I can't panic. There's no point. We had talked about this. He's been a DNR since we found out he was sick. He didn't want to be saved. I should be calling the morgue, but that would look suspicious. So instead, I dial 911 and tell them I need paramedics. The dispatcher sounds calm, like this is just another day at Dan's ravine. I almost laugh. Funny, really, that this place was called that. My husband's middle name was Daniel. Fitting, like the earth had always planned to take him. Then from below, I hear a shrill, wet, rattling gasp. I freeze. I know that sound. He's not dead. But the sound that follows next, it's not human. It's a growl. A thick, phlegm-filled, wheezing growl, like a lion with a throat full of jelly. And I know that sound too. In my years as a nurse, I'd heard it countless times. The air escaping from a dead body's lungs. A deep, final exhale. A death wheeze. I feel ice slip down my spine. Because my husband isn't breathing. That noise, that sound isn't his. The ravine breathes. The paramedics arrive. They come quickly, too quickly. I'm still gripping my phone when I hear the crunch of boots behind me, the crackle of a radio. "Where's the body?" one of them asks. His voice is completely unmoved. I gesture to the edge. They shine their flashlights down. "Jesus," the other mutters. "That's a bad one." The first guy kneels and checks the slope. How long has he been down there? I check my watch. I don't know why I bother. Time doesn't feel real anymore. 15, 20 minutes. Any signs of life? I don't know how to answer that. They don't wait. One of them clicks his radio. Confirmed fatality. Gonna need a recovery team. I exhale. It's real. He's dead. The world continues turning. Then from the bottom of the ravine, something moves. The paramedics hear it too. One of them lifts his radio again. Wait, hold recovery. I think we've got... The growl rises again. That horrible, rattling death wheeze. The paramedics stop. Their flashlights stay trained on the body. I look down. My husband's body is shifting, rising, not in any way a person should, not pushing himself up. His limbs move first, not the torso, not the head, just the limbs. His arms and legs unfold unnaturally, stiff like they're being pulled by strings, his fingers twisting and curling against the rock. His head lolls uselessly to the side, eyes wide, glassy, unseeing. I don't realize I've grabbed the paramedic's arm until he jerks away from me. "What the hell is that?" he mutters. The other one doesn't answer. He's frozen, his flashlight still aimed at my husband's rising form. Another wheeze. A deep, shuddering exhale. His body snaps upright. My husband, what was my husband, is standing. His neck is still bent at a horrible angle, his mouth slightly open like a marionette waiting for someone to pull the strings. One of the paramedics finally speaks, voice low, shaking. "Jesus Christ, we need backup." Then my husband moves. No hesitation, no struggle, no effort. One moment he's at the bottom of the ravine, the next he's halfway up the slope. The paramedics stumble back. I can't move. This isn't real, but he keeps coming. His body moves in jerks, in spasms. His limbs scrabble against the rocks like an insect climbing a wall. The paramedics start yelling. I hear words like back up, not human, and what the fuck. But all I can do is stare, because I see it now. My husband isn't climbing. He's being pulled. Something below has its hands in him, its fingers wrapped tight around his bones, dragging him up from the depths. The first paramedic finally breaks. He turns and bolts toward the ambulance. The second follows. Too late. My husband reaches the top. I don't recognize him anymore. His jaw hangs slack, his eyes empty, his body still twisted, but his mouth moves now, lips forming words. Not his words, they pour from his throat, overlapping, whispering, laughing, screaming. Some are deep, some are childlike, some sound inhuman. The paramedic makes a strangled noise and stumbles back, shaking his head. My husband, or whatever wears his skin, tilts his head at me, and I hear it. You should have let him fall deeper. Then he lunges. I don't see what happens next. I don't want to. I turn and run. The paramedic is already ahead of me, but it doesn't matter. I hear the screams behind us. The wet snap of bone, the tearing of muscle, the gurgled chokes of a man being silenced. I run harder. I don't look back. The police report says the paramedics were attacked by a wild animal. That's what the news says too. I don't say anything. I sit at home, my hands still stained with blood, my brain still replaying the moment his body moved on its own. I don't tell them about the voices, or about how the ravine had taken him but refused to let him go. I don't tell them because they already know. The people in town don't ask questions. They don't offer condolences. They just look at me like they knew this would happen, like they'd seen it before. And when I walk past the edge of Dan's ravine, I swear I hear the wind whisper my name, like it's waiting for me too. I should have let him fall deeper. Maybe then he wouldn't have come back. I ate a man last night. I can still feel him inside me, clinging to the lining of my stomach, his taste lingering on my tongue like a secret I can never confess. The salt of his sweat, the iron tang of his blood, the give of his muscles between my teeth. It was real. It was necessary. I woke up to the smell of copper on my breath, dried black stains under my fingernails, and a fullness I haven't felt in years. A fullness beyond hunger, something deeper, more complete. I didn't know his name. Does that make it easier, harder? He was just a man, one of many, someone with a heartbeat that slowed beneath my grip, a face contorted in the exquisite realization that he would never see the morning. I remember his eyes, wide, darting, looking past me at the walls of my apartment as if there might be a way out hidden in the peeling wallpaper. There wasn't. He made a sound when I sunk my teeth into his shoulder, something between a gasp and a sob, and I shuddered at the intimacy of it. He tried to fight. They always do. The frantic thrashing, the begging, the futile attempts at escape. These are the last acts of those who still believe the world is kind, that life has rules. I held him down, felt his pulse hammering against my tongue, his tendons straining as I peeled skin from muscle with practiced precision. It was beautiful. You think I'm a monster. That's fair. I would have thought the same once. But if you had known hunger like mine, the kind that gnaws at the marrow, that whispers in your ear at night, promising relief just beyond the next heartbeat, you wouldn't judge so quickly. I wasn't always this way. I used to eat like everyone else. I used to feel empty in the way that people understand. An empty stomach, an empty heart, an empty life. But this is different. This is not the hunger of the poor or the lonely. This is the hunger of the forsaken, the cursed, the enlightened. The first time was an accident. A bar fight turned messy, a bottle broken, a throat opened. I had never seen so much blood outside of a butcher's shop. It pooled around my feet, still warm, steaming in the winter air. I pressed my hand to the wound, trying to stop the flow, but my fingers sank into the gaping flesh, and the scent was unbearable. My stomach clenched so hard I thought I might collapse. Then I licked my fingers. The taste ignited something inside me, a spark that flared into an inferno, consuming everything I had ever known about myself. I leaned in, lips pressing to the torn flesh, and drank. Drank until I was shaking, until I felt him slipping away beneath me, his last breath ghosting against my cheek. The hunger was gone. For the first time in years, I felt whole. That was 2 years ago. I told myself it wouldn't happen again. I lasted 6 months before the hunger came creeping back, curling around my ribs, whispering in my ear. 6 months before I found myself in a motel room with a man who wouldn't be missed. I took my time with him, savoring every bite, every shudder, every silent scream trapped in his throat. I've been careful. I choose the ones no one will look for, the ones already drowning in loneliness, the ones whose disappearances will be nothing more than whispers between cashiers and distant relatives. But last night was different. Last night, I brought him home. I had never done that before. It was reckless, foolish, his blood soaked into my sheets, into my mattress, into the spaces between the floorboards. Even now, I swear I can hear the house drinking it in, holding on to it like a secret. I shouldn't have done it. Not because I regret it, because I don't, because I want more. I sit at the kitchen table staring at the remnants of my feast. Bone fragments, shredded muscle, a sliver of scalp tangled in dark hair. My plate is clean, licked spotless. The hunger is silent, but I know it won't last. It never lasts. I need to be smarter next time, quieter, more careful. The craving will come again, and I have to be ready. I can't afford mistakes. People notice mistakes. I stand, my chair scraping against the tile, and begin the meticulous process of scrubbing away the evidence. The scent of bleach fills the air, burning my nostrils. I scrub until my hands ache, until my fingers crack and bleed. I press my thumb to my lips, tasting the warmth there, and shiver. The hunger stirs. Tonight I will walk the streets again, searching, and when I find the next one, I will take my time. I always thought I knew fear. I had skydived at 14, scaled sheer rock faces without a rope, and dove into the ocean's depths more times than I could count. But nothing compared to the terror of that last cage dive. It was supposed to be the experience of a lifetime. An illegal trip, sure, but that only made it more thrilling. No tourist gimmicks, no reinforced bars, just raw steel and the deep blue, staring straight into the gaping jaws of nature's most perfect predator. The captain, a wiry man named Rourke with salt-stiff hair and a grin that never quite reached his eyes, had promised a real encounter. "You want the big ones?" he'd said, dragging a cigarette to the corner of his mouth. "The kind that make your bones hum? You'll get 'em." I should have turned back when I saw the boat. It was rusted, barely holding together, its name scraped off long ago. The deck smelled of rotting fish, the scent clawing at the inside of my nose. The crew was silent, their eyes dark and sunken, moving through the motions without enthusiasm, like they'd rather be anywhere but here. But the money was already paid, and the thrill seeker in me had already strapped into my wetsuit. We reached open waters by sundown. The ocean stretched out like a dark, endless void. Rourke barked orders, and the crew began baiting the water with bloody chunks of meat. The scent carried fast, thick and nauseating, dissipating into the waves. Then we waited. At first there was nothing, just the rhythmic slosh of the waves against the boat, the distant caw of gulls. Then slowly, the water changed. The first fin cut through the surface, black as a shadow, followed by another. Then another. I grinned, adrenaline singing through my veins. "We've got company." Rourke chuckled, but it sounded hollow. "You could say that." The sharks circled, sleek bodies gliding effortlessly beneath the waves. But something was off. They weren't lunging for the bait. They weren't thrashing, weren't feeding. They were just watching. A cold unease settled in my stomach. The crew worked fast, lowering the cage into the water. Unlike the tourist cages I'd been in before, this one looked barely intact. The bars were thinner, rusted in places. My gut clenched, but I ignored it. I climbed in. The cage hit the water with a lurch, descending into the murky depths. At first, all I could hear was my own breath, the slow hiss of oxygen through the regulator. The water around me darkened, the silhouettes of the sharks growing sharper, more defined. Then the light above me disappeared. Something massive had moved over the boat, blocking out the sun entirely. My chest tightened. Then I saw it. At first I thought it was a regular shark, but it was far too large. It had a body 5 times larger and longer than the sharks that swam nearby. What little light that made it down to where we were at illuminated its skin just a little. Its skin was dark red, and it had 2 massive white eyes. Its mouth stretched wide enough to fit the entire boat in, with room left over. When it opened its mouth, all I could see were rows of razor-sharp teeth. The other sharks scattered, vanishing into the dark. My fingers gripped the rusted bars so tightly my knuckles burned. My breath grew heavy, fogging the inside of my mask. The thing hovered just beyond the cage, its massive body undulating like a snake, moving in slow, unnatural motions. Then from the depths of that impossible maw, I heard something I should not have been able to hear underwater. A whistle. Then there was another whistle, fainter, coming from deeper. There was more than one, and they were talking. I let out a choked gasp, bubbles rushing toward the surface. I turned, grabbing at the chain to signal the crew to pull me up. But the chain was gone. My stomach dropped. I looked up, expecting to see the boat rocking above me. There was nothing but darkness. The surface had vanished. Panic clawed at my throat. I kicked against the cage, shaking it violently. But it didn't move. My breaths came too fast, too shallow. The thing beyond the bars cocked its head, its gaping mouth forming a grotesque mockery of a smile. Then it moved. It didn't swim. It shifted. One moment it was 10 feet away. The next its teeth were inches from the bars. I screamed, a burst of bubbles escaping past my lips. The bars groaned. I thrashed, kicking against the metal, pushing myself as far back as I could. My oxygen tank scraped against the cage. The metal bent inward, the rusted welds creaking under pressure. The thing put the cage in its mouth as if it were about to swallow it whole. Then the bars snapped. I shot upward, adrenaline shoving me past the limits of panic. My lungs screamed as I kicked for the surface, my vision blurring. The water churned around me, something pulling at my leg. I tore free, kicking harder, lungs ready to burst. The darkness above me finally thinned, the first glimmers of light breaking through. And then hands, human hands, grabbed me, yanking me onto the deck. I collapsed onto my side, gasping, coughing up seawater. Sea salt stung my eyes. The boat rocked beneath me. A shadow loomed over me. Rourke, his face ashen, his hands trembling. "You saw it," he whispered. I nodded, shuddering violently. "What the hell was that?" He didn't answer. He just turned, staring out over the water. The ocean was calm again, undisturbed, but I knew better. The gas station stood alone on the desolate stretch of highway, its fluorescent lights buzzing against the ink-black sky. The nearest town was 20 miles away, and the only visitors this late were truckers looking for coffee, drifters looking for cigarettes, and things that didn't belong in the world of the living. Jacob wiped down the counter for the third time that hour, boredom gnawing at him. The night shift was always slow, just him, the hum of the refrigerators, and the occasional moth throwing itself against the buzzing red and blue neon open sign. The radio was on low, barely a whisper of static-filled country music in the background. Then the smell hit, burning, thick, acrid, cloying. It filled his nostrils, coated his tongue, clung to his clothes like invisible fingers. Not the sharp tang of gasoline, something organic, something burning alive. Jacob gagged, covering his nose with his sleeve. The station smelled of old coffee, dust, and motor oil. But this was fire, burning wood, something that should have sent alarms blaring. He spun toward the front doors, expecting to see flames licking at the pumps, an inferno swallowing the highway. The parking lot was empty. The pumps stood quiet, the price sign flickering weakly in the night. No smoke, no fire. He grabbed the radio. "Hey, Doug, you smelling this?" "Something's burning." A crackle, then Doug's voice came through, rough with sleep. "Burning?" You high, kid? Jacob scowled. Doug, the owner, only checked in when absolutely necessary. He lived in a tiny trailer a stone's throw from the station, close enough to pick up on the walkie-talkie that they used at the station. I'm serious, man. Smells like something's on fire. Something bad. Doug sighed through the radio. Ain't nothing burning, Jake. No alarms going off. No one's called in anything. Probably just roadkill stinking up the place. Jacob wanted to argue, but the smell was already fading, thinning into the stale gas station air, as if it had never been there at all. His stomach twisted. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe his mind was playing tricks on him. Maybe Doug was right. A soft ding broke the silence. Someone had stepped inside. Jacob turned, his stomach tightening. The man at the door was tall, his body thin and stretched in a way that made Jacob's skin crawl. His face was long, eyes deep set, lips pressed together in a straight, thin line. He stood stiff, his hands clasped to his sides. His coat was black and buttoned to the throat, the fabric moving slightly as if caught in an unseen breeze. Jacob forced a smile. Welcome to Petromart. You need gas or anything? The man didn't respond. He stepped forward, slow and deliberate, his boots clicking against the linoleum floor. The air around him shimmered, distorting like heat rising from asphalt. Jacob's fingers twitched. Sir? The man's lips parted, a slow mechanical motion, like someone unfamiliar with the mechanics of speaking. The fire, he said, voice hollow, empty. It starts at 1:37. Jacob's pulse stuttered. What? The man's head tilted, his jaw shifting as if testing the weight of his words. Tonight, 1:37 a.m. It burns. Jacob swallowed hard. What burns? The man's lips stretched into a smirk. Then he turned and walked back out into the night. The bell dinged. Jacob stared after him, heart hammering in his chest. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. He picked up the radio with shaking hands. Doug, you awake? A groggy grumble. Jesus, kid, what now? A guy just came in, said something's gonna burn at 1:37, then he just left. Silence then. Did he look homeless? Jacob swallowed. He looked off. Doug sighed. Call the sheriff if you're scared, but there ain't no fire and ain't nobody burning. You're just tired. Jacob clenched his teeth. Doug wasn't going to help. He set the radio down and turned to the window, half expecting to see the man still standing there, waiting. But the lot was empty. The road stretched into the darkness, endless and silent. He looked at the clock. Almost time. Maybe Doug was right. Maybe it was nothing. Just a weirdo messing with him. He needed to focus on finishing his shift. Jacob turned back to the counter and froze. The security monitors were glitching. The pumps, the aisles, the entrance, all of them filled with static. And then one by one, they flickered back to life. But something was wrong. The monitors showed the station on fire. Flames licked at the shelves, black smoke curling toward the ceiling. The windows glowed red, heat distorting the air. The ice machine melted into a puddle of hissing water. But here, standing in the same room, the fire wasn't real. The store looked normal. Jacob's breath shallowed. He waved a hand in front of the camera. On the monitor, his image stood amidst the flames, the fire creeping toward his feet. A cold dread sank into his bones. He grabbed the radio. Doug, I need you to wake up right now. Static, then burning, fire, fire, fire. Jacob's blood ran cold. The static was filled with voices, layered, desperate, whispering over one another, screaming. He dropped the radio as the clock hit 1:37. The smell returned, stronger. The buzzing fluorescence above him burst, glass raining down. The register shorted, sparking, the lights flickering wildly. The reflection in the glass freezer doors showed flames, but in the store itself, nothing. Then the knocking started. Rapid, desperate pounding against the windows, the doors, the walls. Jacob spun, horror clawing at his throat. There were people outside, or what used to be people. They slammed their fists against the glass, their bodies blackened and burned, faces half melted, flesh bubbling like candle wax. Their mouths hung open, but instead of voices, static poured out. "Let us out, please. It burns." Jacob stumbled backward, chest heaving. His own reflection in the glass was on fire, embers glowing in his eyes. "This isn't real," he gasped. "This isn't..." The doors burst open, flames roared in, the heat slamming into him like a physical force. He fell, coughing, his skin blistering. The burning figures stepped inside, their melted fingers reaching for him, their mouths whispering in that awful, crackling static. Jacob screamed. The fire swallowed everything. He finally woke up from the checkout counter, unaware of how much time had passed since he passed out. The station was untouched. No fire, no burned figures. Just the quiet hum of the refrigerators, the neon open sign flickering lazily in the window. His breath came in ragged gasps. His skin was unburned, his clothes unsinged. The radio crackled. "Jake, you there?" "Doug." His voice was normal. Jacob snatched the radio. "Doug, there was a fire." Doug sighed. "Kid, you ask me if something's burning one more time. I swear to God." Jacob turned slowly to the security monitors. The screens showed the empty parking lot, the quiet aisles, the still night. Then, on camera 4, a single figure stood by pump 4. Tall, his coat moving in an unseen wind. The man raised one long, bony hand and pointed directly at the camera. Jacob didn't move, didn't breathe. The radio crackled once more. "See you at 1:37. The forest was deep, old, and silent, except for the sound. It started faint, just loud enough to hear if one really focused on it. Tick, tick, tick. Isaac Carter had been hiking alone for 3 days. His girlfriend Sarah took a trip to see her parents, and he decided to go hiking. Stress from work had taken a toll on him, to the point where nightmares kept him thrashing about at night, unable to get any sleep. In the span of 5 days, he had gotten maybe 7 hours of sleep. It was his supervisor who actually suggested the trip away. Isaac was having a fantastic time. He'd owe his supervisor a beer when he got back. He accepted. He enjoyed the solitude, the quiet retreat from the constant noise of the city. Out here, there was only the wind through the trees, the crunch of soil under his boots, and the rhythmic pull of his breath. But now there was something else, something unnatural that tore him away from the bliss he got while walking in the woods. A distraction, tick, tick, tick. At first it was a distant sound, almost like a clock hidden in the underbrush. He assumed it was an insect or a branch dripping water from the storm last night, but it persisted, always just far enough away that he couldn't quite pinpoint the source. He decided to ignore it. He wouldn't let such a small thing ruin his trip. He only had a handful of days to enjoy it before going back to the concrete jungle after all. By the second day, the noise was closer, louder. Tick, tick, tick. Isaac tried to ignore it, telling himself it was just his mind playing tricks on him, but the sound was deliberate, mechanical. And worse, it only happened when he stopped moving. On the third morning, Isaac awoke in his tent to complete silence. The birds, which usually greeted the dawn with their chaotic chorus, were gone. Even the wind had stilled, leaving the air dense and humid. He unzipped the tent flap and stepped into the cool shade of the forest. Everything was untouched. His food bag still hung from a nearby tree, untouched by scavengers. And yet, tick, tick, tick. The sound was right behind him. Isaac spun, heart hammering against his ribs. There was nothing but the trees, their thick trunks stretching upward like pillars to some unseen cathedral. He swallowed hard, his throat dry. His hands trembled as he reached for his canteen, taking a slow sip to steady himself. He forced a laugh. Jesus, I need to sleep. Then he heard it again, closer. Tick, tick, tick. Isaac stumbled backward, eyes darting between the trees. A bead of sweat trickled down his temple. Something was following him. He packed up his campsite in record time, stuffing his gear into his backpack with shaking hands. He needed to move, to get away from whatever was out there. Maybe there would be a place by the river a ways down the trail. The trickling water would drown out the terrible ticking noise. The day wore on, the sun shifting through the trees, dappling the ground with golden light. Isaac hiked faster than usual, driven by an increasing sense of unease. The deeper he went into the forest, the more he noticed something was wrong. Not only should he have reached the river by now, but there were no animal sounds, no rustling of squirrels, no distant cry of birds. The silence stretched between the trees, suffocating, and every time he paused to drink, adjust his pack, or catch his breath. Tick, tick, tick. The sound was right behind him. Isaac broke into a run. His breath came in sharp bursts as he barreled through the undergrowth, branches whipping against his arms and legs. His boots slipped against damp leaves, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. His chest burned, his vision blurred with sweat. But after several agonizing minutes, he finally skidded to a halt beside an old hollowed-out tree, gasping for air. He listened, straining to hear past the pounding of his own heart. Silence. Had he lost it? A thin, nervous chuckle escaped his lips as he pressed a hand to his forehead. God, I'm losing it. Tick. Isaac's blood turned to ice. The sound had changed. It was coming from inside him. Tick. He clutched his chest, panic rising in his throat. It was louder now, reverberating through his rib cage, a wet mechanical clicking buried deep inside his flesh. Tick. His stomach convulsed, nausea curling through him in waves. He fell to his knees, fingers digging into the damp earth as his body shuddered violently. Something inside him moved. A sharp, piercing tick rattled against his ribs, vibrating through his bones. Then he felt it, a lump. Just below his sternum, something shifted beneath the skin. Isaac let out a strangled gasp, scrambling to pull up his shirt. His breath tightened as he stared at his abdomen, the flesh just above his navel bulging outward, twitching as if something were alive inside him. No, 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 no. What the fuck? His voice broke into a scream as he pressed his fingers against the swelling, feeling something hard and metallic clicking against his ribs. Tick. A fresh wave of nausea sent him retching into the dirt. A thin stream of bile dribbled down his chin, but the thing inside him kept moving. Tick. His vision blurred as black spots danced at the edges of his sight. He fell back against the tree, his breath ragged. Then he heard the voices, not words, not in any language he could recognize, but whispers layered over each other, a dozen voices speaking in hushed, fevered tones. Inside his head, his fingers clawed at his stomach as panic consumed him. He needed to get it out. Now his knife. He fumbled for it with shaking hands, the handle slick with sweat. The blade caught the fading sunlight as he pressed it against his own skin. Deep breath. Tick. The pain was instant and blinding. The steel bit deep, a hot line of fire slicing across his abdomen. His body convulsed as warm blood spilled over his trembling fingers. Tick. He dug deeper, widening the wound. Something shifted beneath his flesh. Tick. His fingers trembled as he pried the wound open, forcing the slick edges of muscle apart. His body screamed in agony, but he kept going, digging into himself. And then, he saw it, a glint of metal. Small, intricate gears embedded deep within his flesh, nestled between his organs. A tiny, pulsating clock, ticking wetly inside his body. Tick. Isaac let out a choked sob, fingers desperately clawing at the foreign object. He pulled, feeling tissue rip as the gears resisted, their tiny teeth sinking into muscle and sinew. Tick. His vision darkened at the edges. His pulse slowed. The voices inside his head grew louder, their whispers becoming a single suffocating chorus. Tick. His breath hitched. His limbs weakened. His fingers slipped against the blood-slick gears. He couldn't pull it out. Tick, tick, tick. His body went still. Blood pooled beneath Isaac as the life drained from him. His fingers still clutched at his open chest wound, feeling for something that was never there. As he drew his final breaths, the sound echoed in his mind. Tick, tick, tick. The house sat alone at the end of Briarwood Lane, forgotten by time, swallowed by ivy and shadows. Its windows were dead eyes gazing blankly into the night. The air smelled of damp earth and musk. Detective Eliza Merrow hesitated at the threshold. The front door had been left ajar, revealing only a sliver of darkness beyond. She pulled her coat tighter against the autumn chill, forcing herself to step inside. The floor groaned beneath her weight. Dust danced in the slivers of moonlight, slicing through the broken windows. The silence was too thick, pressing against her ears like hands over her face. The call had come in an hour ago. A missing persons case led here. A neighbor reported a strange smell seeping through the walls like the house itself was exhaling something foul. Eliza stepped forward, her gloved fingers brushing against the peeling wallpaper. The house exuded a palpable unease, a sensation that coiled in her gut like an off-key melody, recognizable yet disturbingly distorted. Then the dining room came into view. She stopped breathing. A long table stretched nearly the length of the room, covered in an elegant red tablecloth, its deep color soaking up the flickering candlelight. Silver plates gleamed under the warm glow, each set meticulously, as if for a grand banquet. But it wasn't the table setting that made bile rise in her throat. It was the guests. A dozen figures sat in high-backed chairs, perfectly posed. Their hands were clasped together, fingers interlaced as if in quiet prayer. Their heads were tilted slightly downward, expressions locked in eerie serenity. But their skin, it was wax, thick, pale, dripping down their faces in frozen rivers, their eyes hidden beneath layers of hardened candle wax. Their throats were sealed, their bodies hollowed. Where their stomachs should have been, There was only emptiness, filled with melted wax. Eliza's stomach churned violently. The stench of burning fat clung to the air, thick and nauseating. It was as if the victims had been transformed into human candelabras. Their own bodies used to light the feast. Her breath came in shallow gasps. She forced herself to move closer, remembering to cling to her training in times such as these. Each wax-coated corpse was dressed in their finest, suits and dresses, silk and velvet, stained with melted remains. Their hands were positioned just so, their posture perfectly maintained, their faces forever locked in silent approval of the horrors around them. The vomit in her throat burned, but she swallowed it down. Her trembling fingers reached for the nearest victim, the woman in the emerald dress. She touched the hardened wax at the corner of her lips. The texture was smooth, solid, until she pressed slightly. The lips cracked. A wet sound followed as the wax splintered, revealing the horror beneath. The woman's mouth wasn't empty. It was stuffed full of something unrecognizable at first. Something dark, twisted, folded upon itself. Then realization struck. Meat. Chunks of raw meat were wedged into her mouth and fused together by the wax. The candlelight flickered over the exposed horror, revealing strands of hair tangled within. Human hair. The feast wasn't just for show, it had been real. A sound broke the silence. A slow, deliberate clap. Eliza spun, drawing her weapon, her breath coming in frantic bursts. The shadows at the far end of the dining room shifted, and from them, a figure emerged. A man dressed in an old-fashioned suit stepped forward, the candlelight playing tricks on the edges of his face. His features were sharp and clear, like porcelain. His eyes gleamed with amusement. His lips curled into a knowing smile. "Detective Marrow," he purred, his voice rich and silken. "How wonderful of you to join us." Eliza's grip tightened around her gun. "Hands where I can see them." The man exhaled a soft chuckle, raising his hands lazily. "Oh, detective, there's no need for that. You're interrupting a most sacred ritual." Eliza's stomach twisted. "You did this." His name was William Murray. Eliza remembered interviewing him shortly after people started going missing, but he had a solid alibi, or so she thought. She had him in her hands but let him go. Could his victims have survived if she dug deeper into his alibi? Maybe. William tilted his head as if considering. "Did?" He let the word linger before shaking his head. "No, my dear, I created." Her pulse roared in her ears. "Why?" William sighed, stepping closer. The candlelight made his presence feel heavier, casting his shadow long across the wax-stiffened corpses. "The feast must always continue," he murmured. "The silent ones are eternal. They watch, they listen, and in return, they are granted their place at the table." Eliza's hands shook, her mind screaming at her to pull the trigger. But something held her in place, a deep instinctual terror, a feeling that to move, to act, would be to break some unspoken rule of the room. "Their mouths filled with flesh," she choked out. His smile widened. "A feast requires an offering, detective." She wanted to run. Every cell in her body begged her to flee. But the man took another step forward, and she realized the wax on his face was melting, dripping slowly, revealing something black, a masquerade mask beneath. "Will you sit?" he asked, his voice lilting like a lover's whisper. "Or will you be served?" Eliza's breath hitched, her grip on the gun tightening. "Don't move or I will shoot," she warned. The figures at the table seemed to shift, just slightly, their heads twitching toward her, as if they had been waiting for her decision, as if they were listening. William ignored her warning and bolted towards her. Then she fired. The gunshot shattered the silence, echoing through the house like a thunderclap. William's expression flickered in surprise before the bullet tore through his forehead. The back of his skull exploded in a shower of wax and raw, wet tissue. He staggered, his knees buckling, and collapsed onto the table, sending silverware clattering to the floor. The candle flames trembled. The air grew still. The figures at the table remained motionless, their waxen faces frozen in eternal expressions. Eliza swallowed hard, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She kept the gun raised, her finger twitching on the trigger, but there was no movement, no whispering, no laughter. The feast was over. Turning on her heel, she rushed from the house, her footsteps pounding against the rotting wood. The night air hit her like a slap, the cold slicing through her sweat-soaked clothes. She didn't stop running until she reached her car, hands fumbling for the radio. "This is Detective Marrow," she gasped. "Briarwood Lane. I need backup. Now!" As the sirens wailed in the distance, she allowed herself one last look at the house. The windows remained dark, the front door yawning open like a mouth. The feast had ended, and she had no intention of ever letting it begin again. The meat hummed as it cooked. The fire crackled, spitting embers into the crisp night air. The scent of roasting meat filled the campsite, thick and greasy, coating the back of Jamie's throat with a warm, smoky taste. He swallowed hard, shivering against the chill, pulling his hoodie tighter around his body. "Smells good," Olivia muttered, teeth chattering, her breath visible in the cool mountain air. She sat cross-legged near the fire, rubbing her arms. "What did you bring anyway? I don't remember packing anything like this." "Me neither," Chris said, poking at the sizzling meat with a long stick. A strip of fat dripped onto the flames, hissing as it melted. "Thought we were just doing s'mores tonight." Jamie frowned, shifting uncomfortably on the log. "I didn't bring it." "Neither did I," Olivia added. The three exchanged glances. Chris laughed nervously. "Maybe Ryan or Sam threw it on before they crashed. Smells damn good, though. Might as well enjoy it." Jamie turned toward the tents. Ryan and Sam had gone to bed an hour ago, exhausted from the long hike up the mountain. Their tent flaps were closed, motionless in the dim firelight. "They're out cold," Olivia murmured. "They'd have said something if they brought food." Chris shrugged. "Maybe some other campers left it?" Like a gift. Trail magic. Jamie's stomach twisted. The meat looked extremely fresh, deep red with a sickly shine, the kind that should have needed hours to marinate or season. But it had been cooking when they noticed it, sizzling perfectly over the flames, as if someone had just stepped away from the fire moments before. He stood up. "I'm gonna wake Ryan. This is weird." "Dude, it's fine," Chris groaned. "You're always so paranoid. Just eat and relax." Jamie ignored him, stepping carefully toward the tents. He unzipped Ryan and Sam's tent, leaning inside. Empty. His heart skipped. He pulled back the sleeping bags. Nothing. "Guys," he called. His voice rang loud in the quiet forest. "What?" Olivia turned, setting her marshmallow stick down. "Ryan and Sam aren't here." Chris snorted. "Maybe they went to take a leak?" Jamie swallowed hard, stepping back. The woods loomed around them, dark and endless. A terrible silence pressed in, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant rustling of leaves. Then a noise, a low, wet sound, like something heavy dragging through the dirt. Did you hear that? Olivia whispered. Jamie's pulse pounded. The dragging noise grew closer, accompanied by another sound. Labored breathing. A wet, gurgling inhale. Then a figure emerged. A shadow staggered into the firelight, hunched and trembling. The flames cast flickering light over its body, revealing torn clothing. Bare feet scraped raw against the rocks. It was Sam, at least it used to be. His arms hung limply at his sides, his torso carved with deep gashes, raw flesh peeling away from his ribs. His face was slack, eyes rolled back, mouth hanging open in a silent scream. His stomach had been torn apart, intestines dragging behind him, trailing a thick, dark smear across the forest floor. "Oh my God!" Olivia gasped, scrambling back. "Sam!" Sam took another step forward, then collapsed to his knees. His breath tightened, body convulsing. A deep, guttural sound escaped his throat, something between a sob and a growl. Then he looked up. His lips twitched. His jaw unhinged and a thick, bloody garble bubbled out. "You ate it!" he rasped. Jamie's stomach dropped. "What?" Chris stood frozen, stick still in his hand. A bite of half-chewed meat stuck between his teeth. Olivia gagged, spitting into the dirt. Sam coughed, blood flecking his lips. "You ate it! Ryan, you ate!" He choked, body convulsing. His breath rattled. Then he slumped forward, motionless. Silence. Jamie took a shaking step backward. No, this has to be..." Then they heard it, a laugh, low, breathy, coming from the trees. Chris turned toward the sound, dropping his stick. Who's there?" A figure stepped forward, emerging from the dark. Tall, gaunt, barefoot, mud-caked toes sinking into the earth. Its clothes were patchwork, stitched together from different fabrics, some pieces dark with old blood. Its face was obscured by a veil. No, not a veil. A face. A human face stretched and fastened over its skull. The edges crusted with dried gore. The thing tilted its head, watching them. A breath hitched in its throat. Then another laugh. "Still hungry?" it whispered. "Was Sam not enough for you?" Jamie stumbled back, trying not to vomit, and grabbed Olivia's wrist. "We need to go, now." Chris stood frozen, staring at the creature. "What the fuck is that?" The thing took a step forward. "You like it?" It giggled. "I worked extra hard on it." Then, without warning, it lunged. Chris barely had time to scream before the figure tackled him, driving a jagged hunting knife into his stomach. The blade twisted, flesh parting with a wet squelch. Chris's body spasmed as blood bubbled up his throat. The thing repeatedly stabbed Chris, every thrust spraying blood until it was completely covered with it. Jamie grabbed Olivia, yanking her toward the trees. "Run!" They bolted into the forest, branches whipping past their faces. Behind them, the fire flickered, casting long shadows as the thing let out a wild, shrieking laugh. "You didn't get your bellies full, did you?" it yelled. Jamie didn't look back. He didn't need to. The sound of footsteps pounding against the dirt told him it was coming.